Welcome to this presentation on the simple view of reading. The simple view of reading is a conceptual model first described by Goff and Tumner in 1986. It's a model which sees reading as a combination of two processes, or two sets of processes I should say, visual word recognition processes and language comprehension processes. One of the issues around the term simple view of reading is that there's been a lot of debate about whether the word simple is appropriate in this context, that reading is actually a very complex process and that this is misleading. However, Goff and Tumner have been quite clear that they are not saying that reading is simple. They are saying that this model is simple in the way it presents reading as two sets of processes. Each of those processes, that is to say, visual word recognition and language comprehension, both of those are very complex processes. But in order to understand how we learn to read, we can use this simple model to create an understanding of the way that these processes work together. In 2006, Jim Rose published the Independent Review of Teaching of Early Reading. And in this review, which was a government review, the simple view of reading was promoted as the best way to teach early reading. And as a consequence, it became embedded in government policy for the teaching of early reading in England. Now, it's important to say that is England, not the UK. Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales have their own education systems. It's also important to remember that if you are referring to the Rose Review, you must give the date. You must say Rose Review 2006. Here is a quote from Stewart and Stainthorpe's recent book on reading development and teaching of what is meant by word recognition. Please note that they use the term visual word recognition, and this is just a refinement of the title, and it actually makes it clearer what it is. When you've read this quote, go on to the next slide and we'll discuss it. So word recognition is about seeing the letters on a page or on a screen and understanding the sounds that are associated with those letters when they are combined in particular ways. So it's the ability to process language presented in visual form. So when you see the letters C-A-T, you know they are pronounced K, A, T, and that when we run those sounds together, we have the word cat. If we see the letters D-O-G, we know that they make the sounds D, O, G. We run those together and we know that is the word dog. Now, you need to understand that this is about seeing the letters and how in combination they are pronounced. It does not mean that you understand what a cat is. It does not mean you understand what a dog is. It's just that you can say those words when you read the letters down on the page in a particular combination. See if you can say this word. Hopefully you said ticks. This is a non-word. It doesn't actually mean anything. But the fact it doesn't mean anything didn't stop you being able to recognize it visually, to see the letters T, I, X, and know that the sounds associated with those are T, I, X. Here you see these letters B, O, X, and hopefully you said box, because you know that the letters have corresponding sounds of B, O, X, which when run together, when blended, make the word box. Now you have a mental image of what a box is, but if you didn't speak English, you may still be able to pronounce that word, see it and say the word, but not have that mental image of what that object is. So visual word recognition is not about understanding what you are reading, it is simply about understanding the sounds that are associated with particular letter combinations. This is used as a way of testing for visual word recognition. And here we have three what are termed alien words, that is to say they are non-words, they don't have any meaning, and they are taken from any number of examples that you can find on the web to support children with the phonics screening check in Year 1. So here the child is asked to read the letters T-O-X and say tox. They see B-I-M and say bim. They see V-A-P and say vap. And the little pictures of aliens are to let them know that these are actually alien words, that is to say they're non-words, so that children don't try to fit those letter combinations to words that they already know. So here's the opening of Spike Milligan's poem on the Ning Nang Nong. Just to take a moment to read it through, and when you've read this opening through, go on to the next slide. Hopefully you read, on the Ning Nang Nong where the cows go bong and the monkeys all say boo, there's a Nong Nang Ning where the trees go ping and the teapots jibba jabba joo. Now I don't know about you, but I have no idea what the words Ning Nang Nong or Nong Nang Ning actually mean. They are nonsense. And yet you were able to say that aloud because you understood N-I-N-G, N-A-N-G, N-O-N-G are pronounced in a particular way. Ning, Nang, Nong. You didn't need to understand what those words meant in order to recite them, to recognize them and say them aloud, which sort of is a neat illustration of the simple view of reading, which separates those processes of word recognition that you are able to say aloud, ning, nang, nong, and comprehension. Here you have no idea what those words mean. Say these words aloud. You probably said do is tak. That sounds like a Middle European language. Actually, it's nonsense again. And it's an English nonsense book, if that makes sense to you. And if I show you the front cover of the book, perhaps you might start thinking what those words mean. Do is tak. In my head, I'm looking at it thinking, what is that? And I'm already looking for meaning, even though these are nonsense words. Because we are meaning makers, we are looking to comprehend. We are looking to understand text, which neatly brings us on to language comprehension. So if we're thinking about language comprehension, we are talking about how one understands what is being said around them, how they make sense of the world around them, apart from reading text. So we are not talking about their ability to read a text and understand it. It's about their understanding of the language. In fact, we could call that aural language comprehension. Aural meaning what you hear, as opposed to oral being what you say. So this is about understanding the language that is used around you. When people talk, you can take meaning from what they say to you. Reading comprehension is more complex, and that is what we as teachers of reading want children to be able to do, to comprehend what they read, to take meaning from what they read. So when we say the simple view of reading, we could say it's the simple view of reading comprehension, because reading comprehension depends on you being able to take meaning from the words on the page or on the screen or anywhere else that it's written. So you have to be able to recognize those words, to hear the sounds they make, the combinations, and understand what they mean in that context. So in the simple view of reading, we are talking about language comprehension and word recognition. That leads to reading comprehension. And we can apply our language comprehension to printed text and get meaning from that text when we have reading comprehension. Now, there's often confusion about what language comprehension means in the simple view of reading, and people thinking it's about reading comprehension. Reading comprehension is the final outcome of word recognition and language comprehension. Language comprehension is an oral process, or aural process, and alongside word recognition enables us to have reading comprehension. So we're going to talk about visual word recognition and language comprehension, and you understand those words that I'm using to you. So you have comprehension. However, I've given you here two spellings that you have presumably no idea how to understand. You're looking at them, and yet you're familiar with the shapes the letters are, but in those combinations you don't recognize how those can be words. So here your word recognition is inhibited, but you have good language comprehension, because I can assure you this is English. What I have done is I've transposed the letters. So instead of writing A, I would write B. Instead of writing B, I would write C. And that simply says word recognition. But because you didn't have access to the code I was using, you couldn't engage in visual word recognition in order to read. So you had language comprehension, because you were able to understand me when I said word recognition, the words word recognition. But you didn't have word recognition skills sufficient for you to be able to understand what's said there on the printed page or screen. The Rose Review represented the simple view of reading in a diagrammatic form, which is familiar to most people who have studied phonics, the simple view of reading, and to most teachers in primary schools in England. So here we have two axes. We have word recognition and language comprehension. And we have plus and minus. Now that in itself is controversial, because if we say minus, we say that something may be negative as opposed to just simply not developed yet. It makes in a sense, it makes a value judgment and says that this person isn't good enough, whereas actually there may just be at a developmental stage that means that they have not developed in either language comprehension or word recognition for all kinds of reasons. However, our aim is that children should be able to recognize words and discern meaning from them, that they are comprehending readers, which requires them to have good word recognition and good language comprehension. On the opposite side, we have children who are unable to read in any sense, that they are unable to recognize the words, to know what sounds those words, those letters correspond to, and they are not able to understand the language that you are using when you talk. For some children, they may have very good language comprehension, but they struggle to read the text. So their language comprehension, their oral comprehension, they're able to have a very, very fluent conversation with you and show good understanding of text when it's spoken, but they're unable to break the code when it's on paper or on screen. Other children may be the opposite of that, that they may find it they may be able to say the words that are on the page, as you did with do is tuck. Do is tuck. You could say it, but you didn't understand what it meant. So here we would talk about children who are able to recognize words, but have poor language comprehension. Stewart and Stainthorpe use this diagram, but they refine it very slightly. So instead of saying word recognition and language comprehension, all that's happened here on this slide is that I have added the words processes to both of those. So it is word recognition processes and language comprehension processes. And remember that Stewart and Stainthorpe suggest that it's visual word recognition, so I've adapted that here. And I think these are very helpful changes to the diagram to assist us to realize the complexity of the processes that we're describing. Even when we talk about these two processes together, we are referring to it as a simple view of reading. One final thing to say is we need to remember that the simple view of reading is a conceptual model. It is not intended to be an assessment tool. We may say that a child has poor word recognition processes, and I've used the word poor there, which is making a value judgment. It may be that they may be in the early stages of word recognition rather than poor. But the reasons for that and the symptoms of that are far more complex than just that one statement they have underdeveloped word recognition. To say that a child does not have good language comprehension is a very bold statement. When we say we want a child to be a good comprehender of language, we have to unpick what we mean by comprehension, which is far more complex than the bold statement of language comprehension suggests. So we need to be very careful about how we use the simple view of reading and not simply label children in very, very simple and bold terms, but we have it as a useful way of understanding the relationship between two sets of reading processes.